everyone, this is Shannon here for Honeybee Stamps. In today's video, we're going to do some no-line watercoloring with the beautiful Spring Peony stamp set and Tombow dual brush pens. I'm going to start today's project with the Spring Peony stamp set. This is a gorgeous set with lots of florals and leaves to color. I picked out several images from the set and I'm positioned the stamps here on a piece of Bristol paper in my MISTI, and I'm going to pick them up and then ink them up with antique linen distress ink. This ink is a very, very light ink, so I am going to ink them up a second time and stamp them again just so the images are a little bit bolder and I can see them a little bit better. This ink is also a water-soluble ink, so when we do our watercoloring, it's going to dissipate and kind of disappear a little bit more and kind of bleed into the color of the ink. I'm starting with my dual brush pens here. The colors I'm using are on screen so you can follow along, and I'm going to go direct with paper, and I'm coloring where I want it to be the darkest, so at the base of the petal. Once I put down some of that ink, I'll take a brush and pick up some water that I've sprayed down onto my work surface here, and then I'm just going to take that damp brush and kind of grab some of that ink, dilute some of that ink, and spread it over the petal to create a nice gradation over the petal. I'm now going to repeat this process for my second petal here. Again, taking my marker direct to paper, coloring at the base of the petal where the petal meets the center of the flower. Once I get some of that ink down, I'll then grab my brush, pick up a very small amount of water, and then with that damp brush go over where some of that ink is, kind of pick it up, get it reactivated, and then spread it across the petal to make a nice soft gradation. I went ahead and did the rest of the petals, or just repeated the process. Now I'm finishing up this flower by doing the center. Here in the center it's a little bit trickier because the petals are really tight together and it's just some really small spaces that I'm working with, and I actually found that my brush or my marker was a little bit too big to get in there, so I grabbed a really fine brush here, scribbled some of that marker ink down onto my mat, and then I'm picking it up with my brush and then going to my paper, and I have like a very concentrated amount of that color on my brush, and once I get it down at the base of the petal again, I'll clean my brush, get some water, and then kind of dilute that ink and blend it out so it has a nice gradation again on the petals. And that's how I'm just going to complete the center. So it's a very similar process to how I did the first petals, except for this time I can't go direct to paper. But again, we'll get a very similar look. And here I just finished up the flower and hold the camera so you can get a quick look. I'm now going to repeat this process for another flower. This is the exact same process I did before, but this time with kind of a yellow-orange color. Again, the colors that I'm using are on screen so you can follow along. But again, I started with my marker direct to paper, colored the base of the petal, and then with a damp brush went over, picked up some of that ink that I colored down onto the paper, and then blended it out to create a nice gradation on the petals. I went ahead and finished the rest of the flower off screen. Now I'm going to move on to my third and final flower, repeating the process once more. This one's going to be an orange flower. It's 925, starting again at the base of the flower just like I did with the other two, then blending it out with a damp brush. I'm going to also finish that flower off camera, and now I'm going to move on to the leaves. The leaves are a little bit different. I'm using two colors for the leaves. I'm starting with my darker, which is 379, starting at the base of the leaf and then blending out. Then I scribbled onto my mat some kind of like a Kelly green, picked it up with my brush, and then started from the tip of the leaf towards the center to create a nice gradation over the leaf. I love these kind of two-tone leaves. I do this often and I just think it adds a lot of interest. I'm going to repeat this process now for all the remaining leaves. There are several. I do like to have lots of greenery with my flowers. I think it kind of balances all that bright color. This leaf is a little bit tricky just because it has kind of a fold, so I'm being careful here to kind of get lots of contrast, so the tip of the leaf will have like a lighter green, and where it kind of is up against a fold, it'll be a little bit darker. This is just kind of creates some more contrast, really pushes that illusion of like roundness and depth, and also just makes it more interesting. So I'm going to repeat this process for the remaining leaves here, starting again with my darker and then using kind of that Kelly green at the tip. So I'm kind of blending the two together to create a nice gradation between the two. I went ahead and colored all the remaining leaves off camera, and I'm just finishing this last leaf here doing some final coloring here just to get that last little kind of lip of the leaf kind of dimensional. And once I finish that, I'm actually going to move on to die cutting all these leaves out with the matching dies. But I'll hold up to the camera here so you can get a good look at all our flowers and leaves. As you can see, there's some leaves I didn't color, and I just felt like I had enough with what I had already colored so far. So I went ahead and die cut them like I said. Now I'm going to move on to ink blending a background. I have an A2 white card base here, and I'm just going to ink blend right on the front with Barn Door Distress Oxide. I double checked here because it looked a little dark, but I'm going to start off and just blend a small portion of this with this barn door. I'm actually going to use 6 colors to ink blend this card front. I'm really going to have a vibrant, nice gradation here. Now moving on to Abandoned Coral Distress Oxide, blending it right up against that barn door. Their two are very similar, so I decided to grab a little bit more barn door and kind of beef up that red a little bit more, so there's a little bit more contrast between the Abandoned Coral and the barn door. Now moving on to Worn Lipstick, ink blending that right up against the Abandoned Coral. This is a nice pink color. It's really going to help to incorporate our red pink flower, or red pink peony. Now I'm moving on to Mustard Seed. I flipped my card front around. I just find it easier to kind of blend at the ends, and this way I'm kind of blending towards the center. It just makes it a little bit easier for this kind of half. Now I'm moving on to Spice Marmalade, and then I'm going to finish up here with just a tiny amount of ripe persimmon. This really helps to kind of balance it out because it's really heavy at the top with that with Barn Door. Now I've sprayed some water down to my mat. I'm picking up with my brush and I'm just tapping my finger to the brush to release some of the water and creating this nice fine splatter of water over the card front. This is going to just create a nice kind of dappled or distressed kind of background that is going to add some interest and not take away from the flowers, because it's kind of subtle, it's small, and it just is going to be just the perfect amount of interest behind these flowers. So I went ahead and arranged my flowers, and now I've grabbed some painter's tape and I'm just going to place it on top of the leaves and the flowers to hold everything in place, and I've got it arranged, and then I'll carefully kind of pick it up lift it up off of the card front because I'm going to stamp my sentiment, but I want to keep everything arranged just that way. You could also use press and seal, but I prefer painter's tape. It just works easier for me and I can reuse it over and over and over again. So I'm now grabbed a sentiment from the Fluttering By stamp set, picked it up here with my Misty. I'm going to heat emboss, so I put down some anti-static powder and I'm going to ink it up and stamp it in Versamark ink. I do want to note that I did heat set my card front before I stamped it with Versamark, so I just made sure that this card front was completely dry because I did do a lot of ink blending on top of this. And now I went to heat set my sentiment, and now I'm going to position my sentiment a little offset, and I'm going to stamp it again, but this time in Abandoned Coral Distress ink. This is just going to create a nice little shadow behind the sentiment. Totally not necessary, but I think it helps to make that sentiment pop a little bit from that kind of bold and busy background. So I went ahead and started adding some foam square to the back side of my florals and leaves. And I noticed that one of these leaves were completely hidden behind a flower, so I just snipped it real quick with my scissors. I'm going to use that later just to add a little, since it was hidden and I colored it, I'm just going to add it to the front after I position everything else. So I removed the back end of the foam tape, stuck my florals down, carefully removed the painter's tape, and I'm going to grab that last leaf here, kind of figure out where I want it to go, then trim it a little so it gets nice and tight and close to those florals, and then I'll grab a foam square, place it on the back side, remove the backing, and then pop it in next to that peony, and that actually completes my card. I'll now hold the card up to the camera so you can get a good look at this card. I really went bold with the colors here, but I really like the way it turned out. I love to do no line coloring with florals. I just think it really softens the images and just has a really nice feel, and I also like to pair them with bold ink blended backgrounds as well. I think it's just a really fun and quite a vibrancy of color. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you'd like any more information on the products I use, please head over to Honeybee, and thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a wonderful day.